In this part of our lecture, I want to next move on to the science that this is, our understanding of breathing and how we want to manipulate our breathing to change the acidity of our blood and the concentration of CO2 in our blood, and how we know what the right number is. Why do we know that pushing our CO2 levels in our blood up to that level of 35 millimeters of mercury to 40 millimeters of mercury, why is that a good idea? And it takes a little bit of explaining, because I know that I had in my head that we breathe in order to breathe in oxygen, and we exhale to get rid of carbon dioxide, just at the most basic and simple level. And this is actually not a very good understanding of what goes on. It's actually wrong, and it creates a terrible misunderstanding and probably a flaw in our treatment methods. So the Bohr effect came about a few years ago in 1904, and so it was a pretty long time ago. And what the Bohr effect shows is that there is an ideal level of acidity in the blood. So here we have relatively alkaline blood at 7.4, and then it's more acidic at 7.2. So here we have several curves, and as this curve shifts further and further to the right, what that means is oxygen more easily disassociates from the red blood cell. So we know that when we look at people coming into our clinic and we put a pulse oximeter on their finger, or we measure their oxygen concentrations in their blood, we see that, hopefully, we see that everybody has somewhere between 95 and 99% oxygenated blood, fully oxygenated blood. And this is a good thing. That's what we need to start with. But what we need is to make sure that that oxygen disassociates. The oxygen disassociates from the red blood cell, and that's dependent on the concentration of CO2. So Bohr in 1904 worked out that the ideal level of concentration of acidity that is somewhat dictated by CO2, but it needs to be, here we have blood with no CO2 and how well oxygen disassociates, and by adding CO2, further acidifying the blood, this oxygen disassociation shifts to the right and oxygen more easily disassociates. And the ideal numbers that we come up with are described by the Haldrane effect. And the Haldrane effect, what it shows is that ideally, what we want is we would like our CO2 levels to get up into the range of 40 millimeters of mercury. I know that when I started using a capnograph, that my resting CO2 levels were around 27, 28 millimeters of mercury. And people go into anxiety at 25 millimeters of mercury. So mine were pretty low, and that hasn't been too different from any of the patients that I see. Now I can easily push my CO2 levels up above 35, sometimes getting them up to 40, but it takes some work. But anyway, these are what we consider to be the ideal levels that we're after. A better picture. And I consider this downright magical. Magic. What we are doing is we are creating inside of our lungs an artificial atmosphere by the way by regulating the volume of air we breathe in and the volume of air we breathe out and the volume of air we retain. We work on regulating those by by our inhale and exhale. And what we end up with, the way we know when someone is breathing correctly, is we can measure their exhaled ETOH, their exhaled ETCO2, exhaled carbon dioxide, end tidal, that's the end tidal CO2. And ideally, when we would like it to be getting up in that 35 to 40 millimeters of mercury, because we know from the graph that was worked out in the oxygen dissociation curve, we know that that's the ideal level for oxygen to dissociate. And those numbers, how that exchange takes place in the lungs, was worked out by Haldrane and is called the Haldrane effect. So I know I tried not to make that too deep into the get too deep in the woods. But I just want to point out that the values we're using in clinic, when we say that this is where you want people to be, this is the science, this is where it comes from. It's in all physiology books, the oxygen dissociation curve, and how you change that, how the acidity of the blood changes by increasing carbon dioxide in our blood. That's one thing. And then the new science of breathing, what we're presenting to you as breathing is the key. What we're presenting is how to enhance our clients' breathing and our own breathing so that we reach those ideal levels of CO2 concentrations in our blood, so that oxygen will more freely dissociate, get into our brains, get into our tissues and organs, and reverse some of those processes that we see occurring when people are over breathing and their CO2 levels are too low. So thank you very much.